Welcome back to another episode and the final episode of the NFL Weekly Injury Report here from Mobility Doc Sports Network. I'm your host, Dr. John. A lot of fantasy championships finished up this past week. If that was one of your leagues, congratulations. I'm just going to assume that you won because you've been watching the podcast. You know what's going on. You're in the know. So there's no way you could have lost. Unless you're like me and you had Alvin Kamara, James Conner, and Hunter Henry. But yeah. Other than that, you're probably fine. Speaking of Alvin Kamara, he is again on the injury report, still with that groin injury. He did not practice Thursday. And on top of that, one of his backups, Kendre Miller, also did not practice with a concussion. So it's looking like Kamara is again trending to be out, especially with the Saints long out of the playoff hopes and playoff position. So he's expected not to play, and Miller is also out. So someone else will be heading that backfield, or they're more likely to go with a committee approach. Another person on my team, Hunter Henry, had a foot injury, which may lead to part of the reason why he did not have any points for me. That doesn't matter. He did play the entire game. However, he was limited in practice on Thursday. Head coach Gerard Mayo did say that all healthy starters will play. So if Henry is deemed ready to go and is able to go, he will play. Mooney, the wide receiver for the Falcons, was listed with a shoulder injury this week on the injury report. He was limited in practice, but he played last week. It doesn't seem to be too serious. I would expect him to play again. Jalen Hurts continues to be listed with a concussion and left finger injury. I've not heard a lot of where he is in his recovery. But even if he is cleared, I would still expect him to sit out, as a lot of the Eagles players and starters are sitting out this week, including Saquon Barkley. I get the reason. It's unfortunate that he is. It's kind of that 50-50 thing. But if he were to get hurt for some odd, hopefully never happens reason, Philly season would take a huge hit and playoff chances would take a huge hit as far as continuing on in the playoffs. And that is not something that anyone wants to see. So I think they're making the right call with resting him, Hurts, and a bunch of the starters. A running back who also will not be playing, but due to injury, is Jerome Ford, the running back for the Browns. He is out with an ankle injury. On top of that, Pierre Strong is also out with a concussion. And that leaves Deontay Foreman, who I can't believe he's still in the league. He's been around for a while, so kudos to him for still hanging around. But it looks like Foreman will be the lead back going into this weekend for the Cleveland Browns. Josh Jacobs was taken out of the game this past week, possibly due to this injury, maybe not, but he was limited in practice on Thursday with a wrist injury. It is unclear of whether or not he'll be able to go, but it seems to be leaning towards he will play. Malik Neighbors is again on the injury report with a toe injury. That's had him on the injury report the past couple of weeks. He played last week. He had a fantastic game last week, so much so that the Giants went from the first overall pick to the fourth. And I would expect him to still play this week against the Eagles. Aaron Jones, the running back for the Minnesota Vikings, was on the injury report with a quad injury, and he was held out of the end of the game last week. But he did practice in a limited fashion on both Wednesday and Thursday, which is a really positive sign, and I would expect him to play on Sunday night in a huge game for the NFC North Division title, where whoever ends up winning gets the NFC North title and the first overall spot, I believe, in the playoffs. And the loser gets fifth seed in the playoffs, which to have 14 wins and have to play an away game in the first round of the playoffs is absolutely crazy. But he's expected to go. T. Higgins, wide receiver for the Cincinnati Bengals, was again listed with an ankle and knee injury, similar to last week. He is questionable to play. He was questionable last week going into the game, and he had one of his better weeks of the season. So I would say that he's leaning towards playing, but it's something to monitor regardless. Brock Purdy, quarterback for the 49ers, has been relatively healthy this year compared to everyone else on his team. But unfortunately, he pops up this week with a right elbow contusion. That is the same elbow that he injured 2 years ago in the playoffs against the Philadelphia Eagles in the NFC Championship game. But it's just a bruise, just a contusion, not a UCL injury, so that's a good thing. However, he didn't practice on Thursday. He's someone to monitor going into end of the season in the last game this week. Unfortunately, if you're Maggie, you have both Jalen Hurts and Brock Purdy on your team for your quarterbacks, and you're going to have to find a new one, unfortunately. For everyone else who was watching, we actually play each other this week for the third place game, so there's a little bit of a personal vendetta there as well, I'm sure. But let's get into our deep dive. Unfortunately, there was a pretty gruesome injury that involved a lot of different things that were injured, but Tank Dell, the wide receiver for the Houston Texans, who fractured his fibula last season, was then dealing with a gunshot wound that he suffered over the summer during the offseason, and then now was undercut by a teammate, not on purpose, while he was catching a touchdown, and he suffered a torn ACL, MCL, LCL, meniscus, and he dislocated his kneecap. The only thing that he managed to not tear was his PCL. He is obviously done for the season. He's going to have surgery, and it's also likely that he will miss the 2025 season. It's not impossible that he ends up playing, but I would not expect to see him in 2025, unfortunately, either. Partially due to not only the extent of damage that occurred to that knee, but also then just the timeline and the time frame that it occurred. You're looking at a year, if not more, of a recovery to get everything healed and then get back the stability, strength, range of motion. And the fact that it happened in December at the end of the season makes it a little bit tougher for him to get back for next season. But as far as a recovery protocol for him, obviously surgery is required. It can be done all at once, or it's going to be staged. I would expect some aspect of it to be staged, but they may try to do it all at once. Regardless, the risk with staging or delaying it, there may be more hurdles or more difficulties as he's rehabbing, related to the stability of that knee, the range of motion of the knee, the strength in that knee, and ultimately getting back to sport-specific activities. That is where he currently stands. If you are interested in more of the specifics as far as the ACL, MCL, LCL, meniscus recoveries, I've done previous deep dives into those for different players, focusing specifically on the ACL, specifically on the MCL, so on and so forth, that I highly recommend you taking a look at and getting a greater understanding of just a part of the surgery that Dell will be going under. The one thing that will be considered is whether he has a meniscus repair or a full-on resection where they remove and debride that meniscus. And it's tough because he is very young. He still has a lot of hopefully playing days in his future, as well as just a long life ahead. And so while removing the torn piece of the meniscus and removing the meniscus as a whole would allow him to get back on the field faster because you don't have to wait for that meniscus to heal, there's those other factors where it's like, okay, you're going to have long-term effects then of like a more likelihood of a knee replacement needed at some point and osteoarthritis and things of that nature, because he doesn't have that meniscus as a shock absorber and the other functions that it provides. On one hand, he'd be able to get back on the field sooner. On the other hand, he has like a much more promising long-term outlook. That's a tough decision to make, especially being an athlete who wants to play, who wants to get back on the field. But he's going to be in a brace for a very long time, most likely hinge brace, and as he continues to work through his progression of improving that range of motion eventually. But he's already having so much that needs to be repaired. That's going to be something where they really have to heavily debate, okay, is it worth getting a repair just because we have to repair 3 other ligaments? Or is it worth resecting the meniscus and taking it out to allow for one less thing to have to heal for longer? Ultimately, I don't know enough about the specifics of his case or the details surrounding it for me to make a confident decision, but I have no doubt that he will get back on the field at some point, and hopefully with no more injuries from here on out for him. He's gone through a lot over the last year, really, and wishing him nothing but the best and a quick and full recovery. Thankfully, that was the only super serious injury this week, or I think it actually happened 2 weeks ago, but we're getting towards the end of the season. Players are always a little bit nicked and bruised, but thankfully there wasn't anything too major this past week, which is a good end, or a good thing on our end, because as much as I enjoy talking about these things in the NFL and sports in general, you never want to see anyone get hurt. that is what I have for the final episode of the NFL Weekly Injury Report. I'm not sure where I'm going to go from here. I'm thinking, we might do something on a little bit longer of a time frame where I release a specific injury regarding to any type of sport with just a deeper dive. But if you guys have any suggestions, anything you want to hear about, whether it's a different sport, specifics on an injury or a player or something like that, make sure you comment down below. And as always, subscribe, click that bell so you know when we're releasing videos. And obviously for this podcast as well. But I appreciate everyone for joining me on the ride this season. I hope everyone won their fantasy, and I'm just going to say it, I think everyone won their fantasy championship. So congratulations to everyone, and let's hope that I pull out a win this week against Maggie, because if I lose and she's on a third string quarterback that she just picked up off free agency, I'm never going to hear the end of it, and nor should I. But thank you as always, and I'll see you guys soon.